now we are going to discuss about the phloem parenchyma. So actually these are also a thin walled cells, and they helps to these are like, if you see here, they have a you can see they have a elongated cells, and actually what is their role? They help to store the food. And so what is their role? To store food. Store food. So as what we have seen, like if you talk about parenchyma, so it is a simple permanent tissue and it forms the basic structure of the plant, and it also stores the food. So here in phloem parenchyma, it also helps to store the food. Otherwise, what is the next function? So it has slow lateral conduction of food. It helps to slow lateral conduction of food. So if you recall in xylem, what we have seen, that in like xylem, what is the role of xylem parenchyma? So it helps to store the food and lateral conduction of water. So in phloem, what is its role? Same. Here it will help to the lateral conduction of food, as all the parts of plant need food. So if you see the structure of sieve tube, so they help to the conduction of food vertically. So here these parenchyma will help to conduction of food laterally to the plant. So this is about the phloem parenchyma. Now phloem fibers. Phloem fibers. So as what we have seen, that all the cells of phloem parenchyma will be living cells except the phloem fiber. So here cells are dead. Here the cells will be dead, and it gives to the mechanical support to the plant and provides mechanical support. Mechanical support. So this is about the phloem fibers. So there are many phloem fibers which have a very economical uses, like jute, flax, etc. So what we have discussed here, we have discussed about the sieve tube. So what is the role of sieve tube? These are the tube-like structure and they have a perforated walls, and the sieve sieve plates are present, which helps to the transport of conduction of food from one cell to other cell. Whereas companion cells, so these actually helps to regulate the metabolic activities of sieve tube. Whereas if you talk about phloem parenchyma, so it basically stores the food and also helps in the slow lateral conduction of food to the plant. Whereas if I talk about the phloem fibers, so what is its role? It actually, these are the dead cells, and it provides mechanical support to the plant. Provides mechanical support to the plant. So these are the cells of phloem. Here we have discussed about all the 4 types of cells of phloem. Now, as what you have seen, that they are made up of sieve tube, companion cell, phloem parenchyma and phloem fibers, but the most important role of conduction of food takes place in the sieve tube. So the main conducting organ of the phloem parenchyma will be sieve tube. Now, what are the basic function of phloem parenchyma? So if you see, what is its role? As they help to transport the conduction of food. So basically what they do, they helps to transport the food which is photosynthetically prepared by the plant to the storage organ of the plant, and from storage organ of the plant it reaches to the growing part of the plant. So this is about the function of the phloem. So basically they helps in the transportation of food. Function. So what we can write? Transportation of food. Transportation of food. So this is about the function of phloem parenchyma. As we all know that plants make its food by the process of photosynthesis. So because of these phloem tissues, these food transports to the storage organ of the plant, and when the plant need it, as growing plants also need it, and because of some reason plants also need some food. So these phloem tissues helps to again transport the food from storage organ to the other like growing part of the plant. So this is about the phloem tissue of the plant. So here what we have discussed about the complex permanent tissues, and they are called the conducting tissues or vascular bundles. So what are these vascular bundles? Actually these vascular bundles are made up of two types of tissues, xylem tissue and phloem tissue. And what is its role? So it helps in the conduction of or transportation of water and minerals from the soil, whereas it will be the role of xylem. Whereas if you talk about phloem, so it will help in the conduction of food from all parts of leaves of the plant to the all parts of the plant. Whereas if you see the xylem, so here the conduction takes place in one direction only, whereas in phloem the conduction takes place in bidirectional. So here we have discussed about complex permanent tissue. Now we are going to discuss about what is the main difference between the xylem tissue and phloem tissue. So students, here we have discussed about xylem tissues and phloem tissues. So you should also know what is the main basic difference between the xylem and phloem. So if you see the xylem, what is its role? So it helps to conduction of water and minerals to all part of the plant. Other than this, if you see the phloem, so it conducts organic solutes or food material from leaves to all part of the plant. As if you see, leaves are the kitchen of the plants, so preparation of food takes place in the leaves. So from leaves, phloem helps to conduct it to the all parts of the plant. Now again what we have discussed, that if you see the xylem, so conduction is mostly unidirectional in xylem. Means what happens? Water, suppose that if it is a plant, so water will go only one side. Why it will be happen? Because these roots are in the soil, so they will get soil water only from this part, so it will go to all part of the plant. Whereas if you talk about phloem, so here conduction may be bidirectional, means all the parts of the plants need food, so they have storage organs, so they store food there. Other than this, when the growing parts of the plant need food, the plants has to reach to that particular part. So what we can say, conduction may be bidirectional in phloem. Now again, if you talk about conducting channels, so here tracheary elements are tracheids and vessels. Like if you see the xylem, structure of xylem, so what was there? The conducting tissues were the main tracheids and vessels, which helps to conduction of water. Whereas if you see the phloem, so here conducting channels are sieve tubes. So main function of transportation will take place through the sieve tube, as they have a perforated walls. So because of that, food can go from one cell to the other cell. Now if you see the components of xylem, so it includes four types of cells: tracheids, vessels, xylem parenchyma and xylem fibers. Whereas if we talk about the elements of or the components of the phloem, so it includes sieve tubes, companion cell and phloem parenchyma and phloem fibers. Now if you see, so three of the four elements of xylem, like most of the cells of the xylems are dead. So tracheids, vessels and fibers all will be the dead cells. Only xylem parenchyma will be living, as it stores the food, and parenchyma is, if you talk about parenchyma, so it is a living cell. Whereas if you see in the phloem, so three or four elements are living. So who are all these? So except fibers, that would be the dead cells, whereas sieve tube, companion cell, phloem parenchyma, all will be the living cells. Now, in addition to conduction, xylem, other than this, xylem provides the mechanical strength to the plant. Whereas if we talk about phloem, so it do not provide any mechanical, it do not have any mechanical function for the plants. So these are the main difference of the xylem and phloem. So students, here we are going to end our discussion on plant tissues. So what all we have discussed here? Actually, we have discussed about the meristematic tissues. So what are these tissues? These are the growing tissues. So what is its role? Actually, growing tissues helps, they have meristematic region. So that at that region, because plant have some specific area where the growth takes place, so meristematic tissues are the growing tissues. Whereas we have also discussed about the simple permanent tissues. So here, if you see the simple permanent tissues, so these tissues are made up of single cells. So what are those tissues? So there we have discussed about parenchyma, parenchyma and sclerenchyma. Again, we had discussed about the complex tissues. So what are the complex permanent tissues? So these tissues will be made up of more than 2 types of cells, and mostly it includes the conducting tissues, xylem and phloem. So here what we have seen that they are made up of more than 2 types of cells and they have some specific functions. So this is all about the plant tissues. Now we are going to start our discussion on the animal tissues. So students, now we are going to start with the animal tissues. So as earlier what we have discussed that the tissues of animals will be more complex than the plant tissues. Why? Because if you see the style, so as earlier what we have discussed that plants have a sedentary life, whereas animal has to move from one place to other place for search of food, mating and other thing. So because of that they have a living cells. So their body is much complex, their life is much complex than the plant. So as if you see the plant, so tissues are only important for the mechanical support and just for the food production of food, function of transportation of food and water. Whereas if you see in the animals, so as they are moving, they need a lot of energy. So here the tissues will be more complex. Whereas if you see the plants tissues are also complex, but here animals tissues are comparatively more complex. Here we are going to discuss about the more complex structure. So students, as we all know that our body is made up of millions and millions of cells. Like if you see the unicellular organism, so here body is made up of only a single number of cells. Whereas our body, all the animals, human beings, our body is made up of millions of cells. And what happens actually? So these cells group together and they forms the tissues. That's why we study about the tissues only in the multicellular organism. Why? Because here cells group together and they form the tissues. So what happens? So here what we can say, multicellular cells actually introduce the division of labor. As if you take the example of your class, so usually what happens? If teachers gives you any kind of work, so what do? As there are lot of students are present, so generally what do? You started making some group, that some group will do some work, some group, suppose that you got some project and you have to do it in and all the students has to involve in that. So what would you do? You will actually form some group. So some group will do something, some group will find out the question, some group will find out what all solutions can be there. So same is in our body, as it is made up of millions of cells. So so what happens, generally cells make a cluster and they form the tissues. So if you take the example of human body, so how the development takes place? So earlier actually what happens? Here suppose that if you see the egg, so it is a fertilized egg. So what happens there? Cell division takes place, and this division takes place many times in the fertilized egg to baby. So what happens? Because of cell division, number of cell division takes place. So because of that, fertilized eggs changes into the baby. Now what happens to these cells? So actually these cells now they start making some group and they will form the delegation of work. Suppose that as there are millions of cells and if you see the fertilized egg, so what is the procedure of formation of baby? So these fertilized cells actually their cell division takes place, and this cell division takes place many number of times. So because of that lot of cells are formed. So now it has a lot of cells. So what happens? They will form some delegation of work. Means they will start some grouping. So what happens? Some cells will group together and they will form the blood cells. Whereas some cells will group together, they will form the muscle cells. Whereas again some group cells will together, they will form the brain cells. Whereas some cells will form group together and they will perform the task of nervous cells. So means what happens, one fertilized egg was there and under this cell there was cell division will take place. So because of that millions of cells will be formed and these cells will start grouping and they will form some cluster and they will dedicate for one work only. Like some group of cells will form blood tissues, whereas some group of cells will form the muscle cells, whereas some form of group will form the nervous cells. So what we can say that every cell will find out its own path, as there is no any direction. What would happen? Cell will group together actually and they will form their own path and function, and this is how the baby will develop from a fertilized egg to an organism. So what happens actually there? Their cell division, because of that they have a cellularity of organization, means these cells will form the tissues, again tissues will form the organ, and again these organ will form the organ system.
No more spending your energy and money on coaching classes or missing classes for rain, for rally and any other nonsense. Subjects covered by multiple teachers with repeat telecasts. Doubts, concepts, applications, no problem. All explained through great and significant animation. So sit back comfortably in your home and watch Study Spectrum TV channel.
So students, as what we have seen that we need cellular level of organization. So what is this? That this is cell. So what would happen? These cells will group together and they will form the tissue. Again these tissues will form the organ. So as you know that there are a lot of organs present in our body like liver and pancreas, stomach. So again these organs will group together and they will form the organ system. So what are these organ systems? As we all know that lot of metabolic activities takes place simultaneously in our body. So what happens usually, these organs they will group together and they will form the organ system. As you can take the example of digestive system, circulatory system, respiratory system. So what are these systems? How they are made up of? They are made up of different types of organs. Like if you take the example of digestive system, so what are all these present over there? Liver, stomach, pancreas, small intestine. So again these organ system will finally form the organism. Right, so this is the cellularity or level of organization in the human being. So finally what would happen? Finally the baby will form from fertilized egg. What would happen? Because of that cell division will take place, and after that the millions of cells will be formed and these cells will group together, they will form the tissues. So actually they will find their definite path. So what kind of function they have to perform. Now suppose let us take the example of breathing process. So why I am taking this process? Because if we all know and aware of the breathing process, what is the procedure and how it happens. So what happens when we breathe? Actually what happens? We can feel the movement of muscle cells in our body. So how the muscle cells are move to our body? So this is actually the speciality of the cells that makes the movement. So because of that these will call the muscle cells. So what happened in muscle cells? What happened there? The contraction and relaxation of these cells result in the movement. So actually what happens in muscle cells? their contraction, and like suppose that if you breathe in you can feel the movement, if you breathe out you can feel the movement. So how it happens? Because of muscle cells. So cells has the characteristic of movement because of contraction and relaxation. So what happens? During breathing we inhale oxygen and it is absorbed by the lungs. Again this oxygen is transported through cells to all parts of the body. So what happens? Then it reaches to the blood. Now the question is, why would cells need oxygen? So as we all know that because every cells of our body need oxygen to break down the food and to release the energy. So what happens? Inside the cells we have a mitochondria. So this mitochondria generates the energy when it gets the oxygen. As we need a lot of energy, so how do we get? If you talk about the cells, so they have mitochondria and these mitochondria releases the energy. Now again blood flows from again this blood carries oxygen and food to all parts of the body. So what you can say again, what is the blood? So blood is again a tissue that is called the connective tissue. So you have seen that we have discussed about the muscle tissues and a blood tissue, that is a connective tissue. So here what we can say that blood and muscles are both the examples of a kind of tissues in our body. So actually this is the examples of tissues and why they are important for our body and what is their functions. So what we can say here, we have here introduced about the animal tissues, and now I hope that you must be understood what you have to do. So what you have to learn in this chapter, as what we have discussed about the tissues. Generally how do they form? So what we have seen that as we are made up of millions of cells, so what happens? As our cells then they group together, they form the tissues. Again there are lung tissues, muscle tissues, then these tissues will form the organ, and these organ when again group together they will form the organ system, and finally the organism will be born. So what we have seen that why do we need these connective tissues? Like we have taken the example of breathing process. So what happens when we inhale the oxygen? It is absorbed by the lungs. Again it is transported to all parts of the body through blood. So why do we need this oxygen? Because there are cells in our body and we need energy, and each and every cell has mitochondria. So mitochondria releases the energy. So what we have seen that when we breathe in, what happens? Our muscle contracts. There is a movement takes place, that is a contraction and relaxation. Whereas if you see the blood, so blood is also a kind of connective tissue which helps to flows from one part of the other part of the body, and it contains food, blood and different kinds of hormones and waste material. So this is called a connective tissue. So here we have to discuss about the different kinds of tissues and and its function. So actually students, if you talk about the tissues, so broadly they are classified into 4 types. One is, so what we can say, broadly they are classified into 4 types. So what are these tissues? Epithelial tissue, other than this, muscular tissue, connective tissues and nervous tissues. Muscular tissue, connective tissue, and the nervous tissue. So actually these are the four important tissues in our body, and further these tissues are again divided into different kinds of tissues, but mostly four kinds of tissues are present in our body. So in this chapter we are going to discuss about each and every tissues one by one. So students, as we are going to start with the epithelial tissue. So students, if you recall, earlier we have discussed in plant about the epidermal cells. So what were those cells? Those epidermal tissues are the outer covering of the plant. So they protect us from various diseases, hurt or various bacterial infection. So same is in our body. These epithelial tissues forms the protective covering. So if you see, so epithelial tissue is the simplest tissue of the body, as there are four types of tissues: epithelial tissues, muscular tissues, connective tissues and nervous tissues. So in which the epithelial tissues will be the simplest tissue. Again, it provides, this is also called the protective tissues, as it protects us from various things. So if you try to recall which one is the largest organ of the body and which is that found all part of the body. So that is called the skin. So if you see the skin, so it mostly covers all the organs and cavities within the body. So if we talk about epithelial tissues, so they will cover most of the organs and cavities within the body. Other than this, here if I talk about epithelial tissues, so cells are tightly packed and form continuous sheet. So what happens? As if you think, if they do not have intercellular space, means they are tightly packed, it means there will not be any intercellular space. So think, if there will be intercellular space, what would happen? If there will be any space, there is a boundary will be leaking. So because of that, if suppose that the cells will be something like this, so what would happen? As they forms the boundary of our body, means they protect, as if you see our body, so there are lot of blood vessels, different kinds of organs are present inside our body. So if the cells tissues will not be tightly packed, what would happen? The blood vessels or other part of these blood will leak out from our body. They can come out from our body. So what happened? That's why they have a less intercellular space. So if there will be space, the blood will leak out from after some time. So we do not want any kind of leakage from our body. So because of that, here cells are tightly packed. Other than this, if you see, blood vessels are found within the tissues, not the upper part of the tissues. Why? Suppose that if someone pushes you or pull you, so what would happen? If they tightly pull you, and if the blood vessels will be present to the upper part of the epithelial tissues, what would happen? You will get hurt, blood can easily come out from your body. But it doesn't happen because of these tissues does not have any blood vessels at the upper outermost covering. So because of that, we just feel hurt. We do not feel like that blood is coming out from our body. It only happens when we get a big wound or sudden jerk, or because of few reasons. But not if someone pushes you and the blood comes out from your body. Now this is about the epithelial tissues. This is the nature or structure of the epithelial tissues. So it is, if suppose that, so why do we say that this is the simplest tissue? Because they do not have any specific function. They just cover all the tissues of our bodies, all the other part of our body. So they form the protective tissue, and here cells are tightly packed, means there will not be any intercellular space. Now where these tissues are found? So where it is found? So these will be found in the skin. So as they will found on the skin, lining of buccal cavity, lining of buccal cavity. Other than this, they also found these blood vessels are also found in the alveoli of lungs. Alveoli of lungs. Other than this, they are also found on the kidney tubule. So these are the few places where these epithelial tissues are found, like skin, lining of buccal cavity, other than this alveoli of lungs and kidney tubules. So these are the few regions where do we get these epithelial tissues. Now what happens here, the cells of the body surface forms the outer layer of the skin. Other than this, if you see what is the function, so now we are going to discuss about the function of epithelial tissues. So students, now as earlier we have discussed about the nature and structure of the epithelial tissues, now what are the actually functions of epithelial tissues? So actually it forms the most important part tissue of our body because it protects us from various things like different kinds of viral infection, injuries, blood loss, from everything. As it is simpler tissue, but what we can say that it work as a protective tissue. So if you see the cells of the body surface, epidermis forms the outer layer of the skin. So if you see these tissues actually makes the outer layer of the skin. Again, it protects the underlying tissues and organs. Means as if you see that these epithelial tissues found on all the underlying part of the body also. So what is its role? It protects the underlying tissues and organs. So how do they protect the cells? So as it is the outermost covering, so they protect the cells from drying, different kinds of injuries, different kinds of chemical effects. As if you get the injury, you suppose that if you get hurt, so you did not get the injury immediately because it will protect your body. It also helps to stop the cells drying. Again, other than this, these tissues also protect us from various different kinds of various viral and bacterial infection. As if you see the skin is the covering of our body, so as you know that these tissues actually help us to protect from various things like viral infection, bacterial infection, injury, chemical effects and drying, because it forms the skin and skin is our protective covering. Other than this, it also forms the lining of mouth and alimentary canal. So these tissues are also found on the where lining of mouth, buccal cavity and alimentary canal. Other than this, if you see that it helps in the absorption of food and nutrients. So one more important work of this tissue is to absorption. So it also, as if you see the small intestine, so what is its role? It absorbs the nutrients from the food. Whereas if you see the lungs, so lungs helps in the breathing. So what is its role? It absorbs the oxygen from the atmosphere. So there are many organs of the body, they have an ability to absorb the things. So absorbing of food, epithelial tissues also present in small intestine. So because of that, they helps to absorb the nutrients. Other than this, sometimes they also help in to perform the secretory function like hormones, saliva and enzymes. So you also know that there are different kinds of secretion also takes place in our body, like different kinds of hormones, as there are male reproductive part, female reproductive part. So there different kinds of hormones releases. So these tissues also helps as a secretory function, whereas if you see that it also secretes the saliva. So what is the role of saliva? So the saliva helps to make the food softer. What is its role? Actually, when we take the food inside our mouth, what happens? saliva acts on it and it changes the carbohydrate into the simpler sugar. So if you see, so they also helps in the secretion. Now what other than this, they also helps to elimination of waste product. Helps in the elimination of waste product from our body. Products. So it also helps in the elimination of waste product from our body. So actually, like if you see, there sometimes we feel sweating. So what is that? This is a kind of waste product which eliminates from the epithelial tissues. So here what we have seen, what are the main functions of the epithelial tissues? These are the cells of the body surface and they forms the outer layer of the skin. Other than this, they protect the underlying tissues and organs. So there are many systems are present in our body underlying the skin. So what is its role? It protects them from injury, dryness, different kinds of chemical effects and viral and bacterial infection. Other than this, they also forms the lining of mouth and alimentary canal. Other than this, they helps in the absorption of food and nutrients, as earlier we have discussed. Like suppose that if you see the work of lungs, so it absorbs the oxygen small intestine. So they also help in the absorption of the nutrients from the food. Other than this, they also secrete. They also perform the secretory function, like they secrete hormones, saliva and enzymes in our body. So there are various enzymes also secretes in our body. Why? Suppose that if you take the example of digestive system, so there different kinds of enzymes secretes. So what is their role? They help to break down the food into simpler substances, whereas hormones secretes in our body. So they also work as a secretory function of the body. Other than this, if you see, so they also perform the elimination of waste product from our body in the form of sweating. So these are the few function of epithelial tissues. So what we can say that it helps in to regulate the exchange of materials between the body and external environment and also between different parts of the body. So what is actually its role? Once it helps to exchange of different materials, like you can see that sweating, or we absorb oxygen from outside of the body, and different, suppose that you got hurt, so we put something, so it also absorbs all these materials. So what we can say, it regulates and helps in the regulation and exchange of materials between the body and external environment, and in also between the different parts of the body. So this is about the function of epithelial tissues. Now again, epithelial tissues are of different types. So we are going to discuss about those types of epithelial tissues.